Good afternoon. This is May 17, 2009. We're here today with Mr. and Mrs.
Deana Kreighbaum.
And Ken Kreighbaum.
And what county are you all from?
Grant County, Marion, Indiana.
Now, I know in your case there's a few restraining orders in place.
Yes.
And you can't talk about the restraining orders. But we obtained a copy of this article from the Kokomo Perspective done a few years ago. So I'm going to ask you questions, and you can answer the best of your abilities.
Okay.
First of all, this has to do with your son Noah.
Yes.
And it looked like there's a few other people involved in this article. Why don't you start from the very beginning and tell us how this whole web become entangled so much?
Okay. In '99, July, I had Noah, and I was supposed to get married to a Bart Turner. During the time I discovered child porn on his computer, and I discovered that there were some young girls that had come forward that said that Bart was propositioning them for inappropriate sexual behavior.
How young?
The youngest was 12. The oldest was 17.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 of them, and they had come forward and said that they were on probation because he was a juvenile probation officer at the time, and he was asking them to do certain things, and he would take them off probation early.
So this was a man who used to be a juvenile probation officer, and he was using his authority to obtain sex from young girls.
Well, we don't know if he actually went through the sexual acts, but the girls had testified in court that he had asked them for certain acts.
Mm-hmm.
To expose themselves.
To expose themselves.
Okay. After you found this out, what did you do?
Well, we turned in the information. The girls had went forward and they had contacted the police. We went to court, and during the court proceeding, the judge had given my baby's father, which I was asking for, supervised visits because of all the child porn that I had discovered that was on his computer. And it had been turned into the prosecutor and into his boss, the judge, and not a thing was done. And my son's father got unsupervised visits. And the sheriff who went into court, his name was Bob Sabatini at the time, he went in to testify on my behalf to the problems that he had experienced, that there were several children coming forward about sexual acts, Bart making inappropriate gestures to these children, asking for certain things. And he had testified that the prosecutor would always throw a monkey wrench into his investigation.
Now, who was the prosecutor again?
The prosecutor at that time was Richard Mockmer.
Okay.
And Kevin Inyart. They were the prosecutors. Richard Mockmer is no longer prosecutor, but he's judge now. All the information, the porn, everything was handed over to these men, and nothing was done. But the sheriff had testified that he had to take away the jail keys from Bart, my son's father, because of the long late night visits at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning that he was going in and visiting the inmates in jail. We never found out what was going on, but the sheriff had testified that he thought there was inappropriate behavior because
there was complaints from
there was
the inmates.
complaints from the inmates.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that was coming forward, and they were worried about a lawsuit, so they put a stop to him visiting late nights in the jail.
It sounded like the sheriff was doing his job.
Yes, he was trying to.
Okay.
Then there was also children coming forward who were in Boy Scouts who were saying that they were given alcohol by Bart because Bart was head of Boy Scouts. He was a troop leader.
Mm-hmm.
And he had his own troop, and he was supposed to have been giving the boys alcohol and showing them porn. And so he was removed from Boy Scouts because of his behavior there too.
So this is the Boy Scout troops up in Howard County?
No, it's Logansport.
Logansport.
Yes, Cass County.
Okay. So, obviously a judge that heard all this is going to say, there's no way I'm going to give you custody of this child.
Right. And he didn't get custody, but he got unsupervised visits.
Okay.
Noah was, it was February, Noah was born July of 1999. 2000, February 7th of 2000, judge awarded him unsupervised visits. And that went on for several months that he had his visits. And then it got to the point of where Noah was hysterical every time I went to drop him off, and he'd cry. But of course, being a baby, he couldn't talk. This went on we had, contacted the judge and said we thought something was wrong, and the judge didn't listen. We also, it got to the point where we've got a hold of the pediatrician and voiced our concerns because he stopped eating. And by this time, he was diagnosed in January of 2001. He was only 17, 18 months old, and he was diagnosed with failure to thrive syndrome in childhood anorexia. And they said it was because of the stress factors that was in his life, and we were sent to a child psychologist to take him there to try to find out what was going on, because Noah couldn't talk. And that everyone had felt something was happening, but we couldn't, get anybody to listen. So the visits continued, and then it got to the point where Noah started telling us that things were going on.
Just for information, the diagnosis of childhood anorexia is not very common in America, but it's very common in Baghdad and Iran and Afghanistan among children, because they see their parents or family blown away from their very eyes. So it doesn't happen very often in this country, but overseas it's rather common, because that just gives you an idea of the level of abuse this child has gone through.
Well, the doctor, we couldn't understand. I'd raised 3 other children, and they were, all grown, and I'd said to the doctor, I said, what would cause something like this? Because it got to the point of, there were certain things that he would not eat. He couldn't eat a peanut butter jelly sandwich.
He didn't like the texture when the jelly squirted out of the sandwich.
He said it was too juicy.
Yes.
And then fruit, we couldn't get him to eat fruit at all because he said it was too juicy. Then we'd taken him he'd never had a taco before, and my husband had gotten him a taco, and the lettuce had come down on his mouth, on his chin, and I'll let you explain, because
he just immediately started to gag and complaining about being on his chin like that. So.
We would go out to restaurants, he'd vomit. That was a regular occurrence. That his stomach was so shrunk up, he couldn't keep hardly anything in his stomach, and so he would vomit what he did eat. But it got to the point of where he was deteriorating and just losing weight. We tried getting the judges to listen, and we couldn't get the judges. Judge Jessup was, told all this by the doctors, what was going on, and that it was very important that the judge understand that Noah had stress factors and that he was exhibiting stress, and that the visits were detrimental to his health, his mental health, his physical health, and that someone needed to intervene. I was told by the doctors that if the visits didn't stop, that he would continue to deteriorate.
Now, there's a restraining order against you speaking these people's names. That's why we're having them bleeped out.
Okay.
But there's no restraining order against me telling those people's names. Based on this article, Judge Jessup seems to be the judge from Howard County, but right now he's in Cass County.
He's a special judge for Cass County. It's a Cass County case.
Bob Turner, that's your ex-husband.
Oh, we were never married.
Okay.
We were in the process of being married
Okay.
whenever I found out the information about the young girls coming forward, and I found child porn on Bart's computer.
Okay.
Several sites, and
So
all that
Bart-
was turned in, and nothing was done on that either.
So he's also one court. So they sent a judge in from another county to be like a special judge
Yes.
to give at least the appearance of honesty and fair play. And so far, based on this article, we haven't seen any fair play here. We've seen pretty much everything leading toward him.
In 2002, July, Noah was getting ready for a visit, and he had to go for his visitation for the weekend. His grandmother was coming to pick him up. And
His grandmother's name is Mary Ellen Turner.
yes.
Okay.
And she had pulled up in the drive, and Noah started jumping up and down, screaming, and holding his private area, and telling me that Fred was going to hurt his pee-pee in his butt.
Now, Fred, that's the former state trooper Fred Turner, and that's Bart's father.
Yes, it's Noah's grandfather. Yes. And at the time, I had a tape on me, a tape recorder, because under the advice of the private investigator that we had hired, who was doing surveillance on Bart, because Bart was not exercising his visits like he was supposed to, and leaving my son with my son's grandparents, with Bart's parents. We were wondering how much time was actually being spent with Bart, and Noah's behavior was getting worse, and he was going into a fetal position when you would mention their names or that he had to go anywhere. He would scream and cry and throw fits and beg and plead not to go.
How old was he at this time?
In 2002,
Almost 300.
yes. In fact, yeah, he was almost 3.
In July.
Yeah.
Now, also, you've raised 2 other children. I'm not going to ask you their names or anything, but what I can tell, they're all well-adjusted, good
Happy.
adults.
Yes.
And so you're already an experienced parents with 3 raised children, to your credit.
Well, I knew that his behavior was not normal. Noah never exhibited this behavior with my parents or with my sister and brothers or any of my family. Anytime that we would mention Grandma and Grandpa's getting ready to come, or we would say that his aunts are getting ready to come, and say Grandpa Spencer's going to be here, he would be so excited, and he would run and get certain things to show him or to play with them. But when you would mention his father's parents, his grandparents, the grandparents, or
Yeah, that's
his
Fred
father,
and Mary Ellen Turner.
yes,
Okay.
and his father, he would be hysterical and beg not to go. He had told us that the grandfather and his father had peed in his mouth. He had also said that they put crayons in his rectum. He said they started out with small crayons, and then they later got to be bigger crayons. He said that they tied him up with ropes, put him in a bathtub, and
Partially filled with water.
yes, that they would fill it up with water to the point of where if he would fight them, because they would put him on his stomach and then insert their fingers or crayons in his rectum, and if he would fight, his face would go into the water. And for a long time he was afraid of water, and we didn't understand why until he disclosed this information to us. We were at a antique shop, and my husband had him on his hip and holding him, and my son kept squirming and saying, "It hurts, it hurts, it hurts." And so my husband, maybe you can tell me,
I thought I was pinching his leg, something, as I was holding, and put him down on the floor. He went to a heart-shaped box and opened it up and said, "Nope, no lotion in it," and put the lid back on, and he was fine.
Now, you have medical proof to back this up, too. You have a
Yes.
Dr. Esther Fox, who testified that she found bruising in the anus, and a Dr. Henry Mountain.
Yeah, she also found dilation of his rectum, and the bruising and bridging.
And then Dr. Henry Malkin, a child psychologist who found no coaching on your half.
Yes.
Dr. Malkin is a very well-respected child psychologist with many years' experience.
Yes. He had told us that Noah's body language, when he would ask certain questions of Noah, and Noah would disclose things, Noah going into a fetal position, holding his private area, begging not to go, just hysterics, crying, just pleading and begging, and saying they're going to hurt him, that he's afraid. He said that was all characteristics of being abused.
Now surely, Judge Jessup, when he heard all this expert testimony from a private investigator, testimony about child pornography being found on his computer, testimony about him being relieved of duty because of allegations of sexual impropriety, surely Judge Jessup said, we have to stop this.
No, on the contrary, he did the opposite. Our attorney at the time, Thomas Hilligoss, had told my husband, because we were asking him, we said, well, we need to at least get supervised visits so that Noah's protected and he's safe. And we were concerned because his health was getting even worse. At one point, he was 3 years old, almost 4, and he only weighed 29 pounds. And
how old was he?
He was almost 4.
At 29 pounds?
Yes, a few weeks from being.
So that must have sent off the Department of Children's Services. They would have sent off alarm bells about that.
No, they didn't even do an investigation. When all this went into court, when the doctor, well, in fact, the doctors had called the state police to report the abuse and what they had found. And the state police, when he started to do his investigation, he took the information to the prosecutor, who was Kevin Inyer, and he said for him not to finish the investigation, not to question the grandfather, because he was not going to prosecute this case.
So
there was no investigation by DCS, and there was no investigation, which was Cass County Department of Family and Children, and there was no investigation by the state police.
So we have a prosecutor here who, for some reason, is blocking a lawful investigation. Do you remember what the caseworker's name was in DCS?
Yes, Anita Clausen and Reba Graff.
Okay.
And the Timmons. Tracy Timmons.
Did any of these people do their jobs?
No, they let Noah down. They let us down. We were counting on, especially with the medical proof. And the doctors were just so frustrated, so upset over this whole situation, because they said they never, ever, in all their years of practice, they never came across anything like this. Anytime they reported child abuse, it was investigated. And this was the first time they have never had an investigation.
It's obvious that Balt has some very heavy connections.
That's what we believe.
He is
and the grandfather. We believe the grandfather does too.
And he's a former state trooper.
State police.
Do we know why he was relieved of duty, or?
We don't know for a fact what it was. They won't disclose.
Other than he was an embarrassment to the force.
That's what they've told us, that he was an embarrassment to the force.
This sounds like a real fine family here. Okay, so you took all this information to Judge Jessup.
Yes.
And he said, no, I'm going to let him have unsupervised visitation.
Yes.
So where do we go from there?
I had to continue to send Noah back for these visits. The judge threatened me in his courtroom and told me if I did not send Noah for these visits, that he would not hesitate to take away my custody. So I continued to send Noah to the last time that when Noah came home. And at that time, our pastor was at our home when Noah came back from a visit with his grandmother. His grandmother had dropped him off. He had had a visit with Bart. And instead of Bart bringing him home, the grandmother had done it. And before she could even leave the porch, Noah was hysterical and he was crying, saying he didn't want to go back. She told Noah and put her finger in his face, "You will go back and come back to our home, and if you don't, I will come and get you." Well, when we got him in the house and our pastor was sitting on the couch, he had said that they had hurt his pee-pee and his butt. our pastor called the pediatrician and said what he had just witnessed, and said that he wanted something needed to be done, because he said this child is hysterical, he's crying, and he's pleading and begging that he doesn't want to go back, and something has happened to him. So he felt it was his duty to report what he had just seen. And we took the doctor, Esther Fox. She got the report. She said, well, since this judge won't listen to me, I think what we need to do is send him to Riley. So we took him down to Riley Hospital. When we got him down to Riley Hospital, before they could even examine him, Noah was on my lap, and they went to do his blood pressure. And he had went into hysterics. And we didn't know about all the tying up. We didn't know everything at this, how bad it was, until a lot of this, after this visit, it transpired. He started telling a lot more. But the nurse had asked us if he was there because he had been abused. She goes, has he ever been abused? Because he was begging for her not to put that blood pressure cuff around his arm. And he was saying that he didn't want to be tied up. He said, please don't let him tie me up, Mama. Please don't let him tie me up. And the nurse said, honey, nobody here is going to hurt you, and nobody's going to tie you up. We're just going to see what your blood pressure is doing. And so she took his blood pressure. She went and told the doctors what she had heard and everything. Well, when we went into the examining room, in fact, it was late that night when we had gotten in there. I'd say 10 o'clock, 11. 11, I mean, it's very late. Well, they didn't have the normal doctors that examined the children.
2 interns.
And they had interns in there. And the interns, when they got in there to examine him, he went into a fetal position, went into hysterics, begging and pleading for them not to touch him, not to hurt his pee-pee, not to hurt his butt. And they said that they did not want to traumatize him any more than he had already been traumatized, but just by what they had seen, they felt that something had happened, but they were not going to do an exam to see if he'd been sexually abused.
Now, by this time, I'm sure, with all this data you had, I'm sure you went to go talk to Mr. Payne or the governor. The governor must have been hysterical. The governor is proud of his award-winning Department of Children's Services.
Well, at this point, we had tried getting with Judge Payne, getting information to him, and that never, at that point, it didn't happen. Later on, my husband, years had transpired, and my husband started working on trying to get some help from Judge Payne through Senator Tom Weatherwax. But at that's way ahead. I went into hiding. That's when he done that. But
okay, we'll come to that point in just a second. Okay. Right now, he's still at Riley, so.
Yes. So at Riley, they said they were not going to do an exam. So on their report, though, it said abuse unsubstantiated, because they could not do a physical exam. So our attorney, what we were going to do was have the doctors testify to what their suspicions were and why they did not do the exam. So when we got into court before Judge Jessup that day, he let Department of Family and Children testify. He let Bart testify, my baby's father, the grandparents, but he did not let anybody from my side, including myself, or our doctors, or our pastor who had witnessed what he had witnessed, testify, and said he was going to make his ruling. And in that ruling, he said that I was hindering my son because I refused to send him back after that visit, after we'd taken him to Riley, under the advice of Dr. Henry Martin, the child psychologist, and Dr. Esther Fox, stating that Noah's emotional, mental health, and physical health was in danger, and that it was just too bad not to send him. So I did not send him.
We put the invitation out to Mr. Fred Turner and Mary Ellen Turner and Bob Turner. We'd like to ask them a few questions for the cameras. And we invite them to contact us, and we'd be glad to set up a time to do an interview with them. Because we have many questions to ask them. And they don't want...
I would love to hear their answers.
Yes, a lot of people would. Now, tell me more about what Dr. Martin found.
Dr. Martin found that Noah had severe separation anxiety. He felt that he felt safe with me, but when he was taken from me for visitation, then he felt like he wasn't safe any longer, so that's why he exhibited the severe separation anxiety, which Judge Jessup knew that. Dr. Martin testified to that. He also said that Noah was exhibiting stress factors and concluded with Dr. Esther Fox about the anorexia and failure to thrive because he wouldn't eat. We'd understood that the reason he wasn't eating was because he couldn't control the abuse, but he could control his eating, so he would stop eating.
See, in this condition right there, childhood anorexia, a child would rather die than continue the abuse.
Yes, that's why he was diagnosed with failure to thrive. They said he's just given up.
Yeah, see, this is not just a red flag. This is a missile launch. You know,
and we couldn't understand why the judge wasn't seeing this or understanding this, because all this had been testified to in the courtroom. And our attorney, when we had asked our attorney to make sure this was supervised, he had told us that we didn't need supervised visits.
Right.
How do you explain?
So there wouldn't be any visits, is basically what our attorney was saying. With all the evidence that was there, that supervised visits wouldn't be necessary because there wouldn't be any visits.
Okay.
So there's too much evidence here to warrant that, in Noah's health and everything, that it would be no visitation.